Welcome to another edition of Talkin with Boss. I'm Parrish Alford. This is John Pitts, the man in black, not Johnny Cash. Our sports editor at the Daily Journal, John Pitts. Lots to talk about in this segment. John, I wanted to start with Ole Miss and Alabama from last week. Hugh Freeze went into that game calling it a measuring stick, calling Alabama the gold standard, said it was going to tell him where his program is at this point in his journey. Where is Ole Miss in the journey?
Well, they have work to do, but I think they have to feel good that till it got a little more out of hand at the end that they stood toe-to-toe. I think if he had it to do over again, they would have made an effort to put some points on the board earlier. On the other hand, they got beat worse than they did the year before. And right,
yeah, they did.
By point, but that doesn't always say everything.
Right.
I have the sense from what I've heard this week that Ole Miss fans don't think they got beat; they think they got cheated somehow. But you don't get cheated 25-0. You just don't. I think Bo Wallace is not to blame in the sense of what he had to say. Because in the echo chamber in Alabama, the Alabama kids were hearing from the Alabama fan base about the uncertainty that the fans had about the team. Bo Wallace said really what I would hope that any quarterback would say about his teammates, that he had confidence in their abilities. Of course, then you have to go out and deliver. And the Alabama defense especially showed up ready to make some sort of a statement there in front of the home fans that the home fans' concern maybe was a little misplaced. I still don't think that's a great defense, but they gave a great effort.
You know, I thought that Bo Wallace's comments were overblown last week. Like you said, if you read all of his comments, it was more about expressing confidence in his teammates than it was about punking the A&M receivers or Alabama or anything like that. That being said, I thought Ole Miss would make it a fourth quarter game because of its offense, not because of its defense. Defense kept the Rebels in the game. They had a chance to get some points earlier and did not. I think an aggressive approach to coaching is going to pay off more over the long haul. It didn't really pay off against Alabama with those fourth down conversion attempts, but it kind of begins to build on another. If you've gotten one or two of those field goals, maybe maybe your approach is different as the game goes on. The other thing is, in the argument about the field goals, people seem to discount the idea that they could be missed
Or blocked in return.
Right. So there's that. The field goals were not automatic. I've seen Andrew Ritter this year. He has a big leg. He's not as consistent as Bryson Rose had been through the years for Ole Miss. So there's that consideration also with the field goal argument. A lot of people have expressed concern about this offense not taking shots downfield. And they seem to think that I've heard from people who said the downfield passing game would have been there against Alabama. Personally, I think that the downfield shots take time to develop. Those routes take time. That requires more protection, and that's still not something that this offensive line is doing a great job of. Bo Wallace does well in the quick passing game, the short game. As the season goes on, though, that to be all they can be, during the government shutdown, we use the military term there, to be all they can be, the Rebels are going to have to become more adept in the vertical passing game.
And I'm old-fashioned enough to believe that you still set that up with the run. You still set up the play action with effective running, and that is something that would be a point of concern, I think, heading into what I think is a difficult game this week and a trappy game at Auburn, because you can't afford a letdown. It's another road situation. There's a lot of enthusiasm over there. Malzahn's going to push. You want to talk about tempo? He'll push you all the tempo that you want. And I think this is a crucial game for where Ole Miss wants to go this season, because they can ill afford, I believe, to go over there and get beat.
well, with two offenses going as fast as they can, maybe we can get out of there in 2.5 hours and everybody make deadline.
That'd be nice, because the next week you're not getting out of there in 2.5 hours. That 7:30 kickoff for
Right.
Ole Miss Texas A&M, that game may last 5 hours.
Right. Looking at Auburn, I'll tell you what, John. One thing Ole Miss did last year, they had a knack of coming back from emotional losses because they had several, and playing well the next week. And the biggest example of this was the Auburn game last year when they thought they had dropped that long SEC losing streak against Texas A&M, a very gut-wrenching defeat there against Texas A&M. They come out the next week against Auburn, and they played well early, and they jumped on top of an Auburn team that was struggling and did not allow Auburn to build any momentum in that game. So there is a history here of Hugh Freeze's Ole Miss teams, which really constitute about 1.5 years right now, of being able to move on from a difficult defeat. So we'll see. I look at Auburn numerically, and I see a defense that is giving up a lot of yards. The 13th most in the SEC. But come scoring defense, which really tells the tale, they're not that bad at 22 points a game. So we'll see. Shifting gears a little bit, John, Ed Ogeron, second chance as a head coach. Probably not an ideal situation, not what he would have thought, I would imagine. What do you think happens there? And did Pat Hayden just go straight to Ed Ogeron and say, look, you've been a coach, so you're going to be the interim?
Yeah, maybe. I really don't regard this as any particular kind of second chance for Ed. He's an interim. He's not going to get serious consideration to be the head coach.
I use that tongue in cheek.
They're aiming a lot higher than that, but he can acquit himself well. I mean, they could come out and play to their talent level. I mean, he recruited most of those guys. I think this is an example of where, even if he didn't have the assistant coach title, he's the guy that you make the baseball manager because he managed all the guys at AAA 2 years ago, and so the kids know him, that kind of thing. And they'll probably play harder for him than they might have played for Kiffin, who's sort of an indifferent figure, it seems like to me. Said to be a micromanager, and God knows that Ed Orgeron was not a micromanager in his time at Ole Miss.
I'll tell you what, Ed had a finger in everything. It seemed like whether
we don't want to go there, but I think the spirit around the building will be better just for having made a change. A cloud will lift up, but Kiffin did the worst possible thing that you could do in Los Angeles, and that is to get yourself behind a UCLA team that appeared to be dead in the water just a couple of years ago.
And you would never have thought that just a few years ago, even with the sanctions and everything, that USC would become the number 2 team in the city of Los Angeles. So anyway, I look at USC and the Pac-12 schedule, and I wonder if Ed can he win 4 games? Can he win 4? There are 8 Pac-12 games remaining. I don't have the schedule in front of me, but I think Washington's on there. I mean, there some difficult games coming. Obviously,
play Stanford and Oregon.
Yeah. I mean, can he win 4 games? Utah and Colorado are on there as well. Oregon State. If he wins 4 games,
that'd be tremendous.
Well, it would. That would be a break-even record in a very good conference.
And they'll get a piddly bowl game out of
They'd
that.
get a piddly bowl game, and that would be one more win in conference games than he had in 3 years at Ole Miss. I mean, it would be. I mean, really, look, we don't have to go back and rehash the 3 years at Ole Miss to know that they were not good. That it was a disaster. What I'd like to see from this is, has Ed Ogeron learned from that? Has he grown? Can he be a better coach in more difficult circumstances now? Some positives, as you point out, in terms of relationships with players that he recruited. So, when you fire a coach mid-season, you've got a lot of turmoil. Maybe too much.
September ain't mid-season.
Well, it ain't even. Yeah,
that's the thing.
The third season.
That is, we're at the airport. There's your car. Hey, you're out of here. That's tough.
Yeah.
And even the athletic director Hayden said, it could have been argued that maybe we needed to make a change before this season, but we wanted to continue to sort of see if we couldn't improve. And I think Kiffin did did a job trying to recruit Hayden to let him stay,
Yeah.
but they just couldn't. It was just a
We
mess.
support our coaches until they're no longer our coaches.
Right.
Is that kind of like a variation of I voted for it before I voted against it?
I think so.
So where does USC go from here? I mean, is USC the plum job that everybody seems to believe that it is, and who do they target as their next coach?
Well, you're going to have some big brand name programs looking for coaches, and I think this may actually be at the heart of why they made the change. Is they're kind of thinking, gosh, we're going to be out there in the pool with Texas. We may be out in the pool with Nebraska, maybe looking for a coach. We could get a head start here if we go on and make a change now, put the interim in place. He's the recruiter, so he can keep recruiting from going off the rails, and maybe we can make a move and get something nailed down before the end of the season.
I saw a tweet that someone attributed to Pete Carroll that said he already has had two BCS level coaches contact him and ask questions about the USC job. So still a big job. It is Los Angeles' professional football team there at USC. I saw somebody say, well, maybe they'll get Nick Saban and he can coach USC and Texas at the same time. So
well, James Franklin is a name that comes up, and Vanderbilt's going to be hard pressed to keep James Franklin in Nashville, where he's begging fans to come
to
fill
games. Yeah.
a stadium that's not as big as some high school stadiums in Texas. Okay. And he could go someplace like that. Now, whether that would fit there and work, I do not know exactly about that. It's also said that the guy who's been at the conversation on every opening there's been, this Peterson at Boise State, finally now is getting a little restless. This may or may not be unrelated to the fact that they're not as good this year as they have been. But there's some talk that he might be ready to cash in his chips.
What about James Franklin, John, and the Vanderbilt rape case? How does that, do you take a guy who's not been implicated in that, or do you take him and do you keep him at arm's length and say, man, that was on your watch? I mean, how do you think that affects
It's not only on his watch, but there's been some suggestion that there were some things sort of said below the surface that maybe have not come quite out. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know how I'd have to ask a lot of questions. If I were an athletic director or president and wanted to talk to him, I believe I'd have to ask a lot of questions and want to be satisfied with the answer.
What about, all right, James Franklin is obviously, we have seen other coaches come and have football success at high-end academic institutions. It seems like you need a qualifier there. From college football, that ought to say academic institution, but it seems like you need a qualifier in there. We've seen success at Stanford. We've seen success at Northwestern, and to some extent Duke. For their history, they're with David Cutcliffe now. And finally, someone in James Franklin coming in to win games at Vanderbilt. Can he go 6-6 there? Can he get Vanderbilt in a bowl game for the rest of his tenure, or do they really need to ante up and keep him? Or what would be a good place if he wanted to leave? Would USC be the next logical step for him? Has he done that level of work?
I don't have a good handle on what his expectation would be, but certainly I find it difficult to imagine that anybody else in this league is going to hire the Vanderbilt coach. Now, maybe if you were a Northwestern later and you needed a coach, maybe something like that, you might take a look. It would just depend on how he felt about going west of the Mississippi and where he felt like the strength of his recruiting efforts would be.
Well, he's pretty close to the Mississippi, having been in Maryland, so he's moved a little bit. California, man, that's a long way out there.
Very way out.
Yeah, South Carolina isn't as far out there. But Jadeveon Clowney started this season with, the Heisman thing attached to his name, and now Steve Spurrier's calling him out there, and the Gamecocks, having won with defense at South Carolina, whereas Spurrier, the old ball coach, was, he was the fun and gun at Florida. Kind of changed his style a little bit at Carolina. He's called out Jadeveon Clowney says he needs to play better. But the question, John, is defense in the SEC overall. Is it just changed, or are we witnessing a historic moment right here that we'll reflect on later when you see the Texas A&M numbers being put up? You know, the Alabama game there in College Station. You see LSU and Georgia playing to a 44-41 game. What about defense in the conference? Is it different now?
No, it's about quarterback quality, I think, is a big piece of it. But we could be having the same conversation about the NFL. Oh, the NFL, they don't know how to play defense anymore. Look at Peyton Manning. I mean, the offense, the pendulum has swung in the direction of offense, and the rules changes have swung it to some extent. I think that this fall, this paranoia about targeting has probably affected a little bit. Might be worth a touchdown a game. I'm not really sure about that part, but the quality of quarterbacking across the league is such, and the way that offenses are run now, defenses are a step behind. Even defenses with multiple future NFL draft picks are slightly behind the curve as well. I think defenses will catch up, but right now it's sort of a golden age for what happens on the scoreboard.
There are some good quarterbacks in the conference right now. I think Ole Miss has really gotten good play through 4 games from Bo Wallace. You know, I feel like if he's reading the blog or the paper and he sees this streak that I have going for him, I know he's knocking on wood, but it's at 136 now without an interception, 136 pass attempts without an interception. That goes back to the second quarter of the Compass Bowl against Pittsburgh last year. So, I mean, that's quite an improvement for a guy that threw 17.
But let me say, I believe, it's a thought that's occurred to me over the last week or so, that if he's thrown that many passes without an interception, and there have been a couple of drops.
Yeah, sure.
But if he's thrown that many passes without an interception, he's not taking enough chance.
Yeah, and like I said, going to the vertical passing game earlier, there haven't been that many shots. I think that has to do with protection as much as anything else. I think you look at the time it takes for those deep routes to develop. You see an Ole Miss offensive line still giving up better than 2 sacks a game. You know, those are numbers that are concerning, and I think they really like what Bo Wallace has done with the quick, the short passing game, the intermediate, because that is a big part of the tempo offense. You know, you're not really pushing tempo if you're dropping back and spending a lot of time in the pocket and asking your guys to protect a long time. I think the offensive line will get better. I think we see kind of a changing of the guard maybe with Larry Matunzel, the freshman, about to move in and play even more at left tackle. Matt Luke told us during the week that he was getting ready to play Emmanuel McCray, a 5th-year senior who has been your left tackle for 2 years. Going to play him inside now. I'm going to play him inside a little bit. Maybe that helps with pass protection. Maybe that's going to help with a little more power running between the tackles, because that's another place this Ole Miss offense really needs to improve. We need to see if they can get some things done, maybe with Itavius Mathers or someone else, if it's not going to be Jeff Scott. Teams are now, Alabama may have provided the blueprint. Georgia did the same thing last year, moving those ends out a little bit wider, challenging those Ole Miss offensive linemen to win one-on-one battles on the interior and make the run game work that way. Because that's going to be how you adjust now. If teams are going to take away Jeff Scott on the perimeter, you're going to have to get better running between the tackles. The back doesn't really matter at this point. You've got some quality backs. You've got to win some battles on the line.
Right. Is there a guy you'd give the ball, that's not listed as a quarterback? Do they have a guy you'd give the ball to at 4th and goal and you've got to score?
Well, I tell you, they say that it's Mathers, okay? But we haven't seen a body of work on Mathers to really believe that. He didn't get many carries in conference play last year, had the sprained ankle earlier this year. They do not have a big, banging tailback on the roster. Jordan Wilkins, a freshman, could possibly be that, but looks like they're going to try to redshirt him. I think they've addressed that in recruiting with next year's class. But basically, you look at Ole Miss running backs, and I believe that to be a deep position back in August, and I do think there's talent there. But after Jeff Scott, your second and third leading rushers are quarterbacks Bo Wallace and Barry Bernetti. Both of them are over 200 pounds, so they're a little bit bigger. But not a big banging back. And the Rebels, that's an area that they will have to address moving forward. John, good stuff, man. Thanks for being with us. We'll catch up with you next week.
Always a pleasure.